Hmm. Recording. So it's going to have like an awkward like 5 minutes of me just kind of like staring at the screen way too closely and then trying to get it going from there. So I got the monitor literally right behind what you guys are looking at. So hence why I keep looking up to the left, because that's where I can see myself and realize that I probably need to comb my hair. And that's all right. But we'll go ahead and keep talking our way through the shoulder. So we left off talking a little bit about our sternoclavicular joint. So we're really talking about where our clavicles interface. Oh man, now everybody and their mother wants to show up. I don't know how tardiness works when we're doing this. And then, oh, that's cute, they're playing. Sorry, you guys gotta see this. Professional, very professional. Okay, so that's going to be a modified ball and socket, because we can move forward, we can move backwards, we can move up, we can move down, we can get a little bit of rotation, but that's not a whole lot we're going to get in that area. Now, the next big joint is going to be our AC joint, and this is where our acromion process and our clavicle are going to go ahead and come together. Now, this is another that's going to slide and glide a little bit as we're moving the scapula around in motion, and it obviously can separate because it's held together just with essentially soft tissue, so it's the ligaments, and we're not really holding it together with any musculature. We then have our coracocollivicular joint, and that's going to be going back a little bit further, where we're going to see the iteration still of the clavicle to essentially our cricoid process of our scapula. Still allows it to glide and move a little bit, just held together by ligaments, not really being held together by muscle. Now, we then get into the glenohumeral joint, and that is the humerus interacting itself with the scapula. Now, this is a very shallow ball and socket. It's held together with a variety of ligaments. Norbs, I'm sorry, buddy. I'll pet you later. I can't pet you right now. Yes, good puppy, good puppy. So what we're going to find is, being the advantage of it being such a shallow ball and socket, we can get huge amounts of range of motion. And it's going to be held together by a variety of ligaments. Now, like anything else, obviously we can have a lot of issues with tearing those ligaments or the underlying cartilage that's effectively making our making our glenoid fossa a little bit deeper, and that's what's known as our labrum. And you guys have probably always heard of a labral tear before. Now, it fits right inside of this fossa. Once again, that's very shallow. So great fact is that we can use a huge range of motion, okay? Now, bad news is obviously we can dislocate it relatively easily if we take a really hard blow to the shoulder or try to pick up a load that's a little too heavy. I've had my shoulder dislocate before on heavy deadlifts. Good news is it pops right back in, but it's still, yeah, it doesn't feel the best whenever it happens. Now, guys, while I'm talking, feel free, please enter. You should have maybe some access to the chat, so ask any questions you want. So, feel free and just type something now so I know that you guys are here, that you guys have access to it. If you don't have access to the group chat, please let me know so that way we've got that. And in theory, if you talk, you should come up to the front. So it'll flip from the video of me in our green room. As you can tell, it's from the color that we painted the walls. Otherwise, I'll just keep going until I hear anything from you guys. I figure what we're talking about right now is pretty straightforward stuff. Now, we then have our scapulothoracic joint. And this is going to be the anterior part of the scapula, so the part of the scapula that's into your rib cage, and then the thoracic wall. Now, what's really interesting with this joint is notice that there's no muscle or there's no bone on bone. There's no cartilage interfacing. It's all muscle that's allowing it. So my scapula is free floating. All of the movement that it does is going to be due to the actual musculature of my back that's going to anchor it and move it in the correct position. And that's what's really fascinating about when we're looking at the shoulder, that we can get a huge amounts of different types of motion in our scapula depending on which of those muscles we're activating. So we can have elevation, so we're talking about the shoulder going straight up. We can have depression where it's going straight down. Okay? We can have protraction where it's going away, so we're trying to go into bro stance, and we can have retraction where we're going to be pulling them back together. We can then have upward rotation where it's going to rotate upwards. You can see it a little bit whenever I go ahead and lift my arm overhead, and then we're going to have downward rotation whenever I bring my arm down. All of these are going to be very important in force leakages and allowing our shoulders to move appropriately when we're going through the range of motion in a number of different exercises. Now, notice when we talk about force coupling before, when we're looking at this rotation, see how we have a number of different muscles that are all working together, and they can only pull the bones according to their line of pull. So when we see elevation, notice with elevation, you're naturally getting some retraction. You're naturally going to be pulling your scapula not just up, but back and together. Okay. When we're looking at depression, since we've got the serratus anterior, which is going to be the fan-like muscle on the front side of your body, that's going to pull it forward. At the same time, our lower trap is going to pull it down, and that's what's going to bring the scapula down, because we can pull from those two different angles. That's going to give us the center force vector pulling us to the, inferior. Whereas when we're going to the superior with the elevation, notice we only have that line of pull. It's going to bring us into the middle. Now, for upward rotation, notice between the upper trap, the lower trap, and then the serratus anterior, when all three contract, it's going to rotate us along that line. And then when we're looking at scapular depression, our rhomboids are doing a lot of that action, but at the same time, when we're getting our levator scapulae to fire and do the same motion, notice we're still going to get just a little bit of retraction, and at the same time, you're also going to be getting yourself a little bit of rotation. So that's going through the basics of the different types of motion that we're going to find in the shoulder joint, thanks to using our stabilizer of our scapula. Now, that's not going into the upward and downward rotation yet, but we're going to go ahead and cover that in a little bit. Now, we then have what's known as scapular-femoral rhythm. Now everybody wants to join the party. That's fair. Okay. Folks, can you guys all hear me? Is this all coming through okay?
I can hear you.
Oh, we got one, Austin. Good. Everything's come through fine so far?
Yeah, no, I can hear you.
Thank you, bud.
Following along pretty well, I would imagine.
Now, when we're talking about this rhythm, it's going to be how our scapula are going to naturally move while we're having some other type of humeral action. So if I'm just going to start with my arms out to the side and then I'm going to slowly raise them up, you can see how my scapula are rotating with them upward as my arms are going into horizontal extension. This is how they should always move together. Now, sometimes when you do movements like the bench press, we want to keep our scapula into a retracted position. That's going to give us a more stable position to go and press with. But typically when we're doing a push-up or we're pushing something away, we want to have protraction at the same time we're pushing an object away. And then we want to have retraction, pulling our shoulder blades back as we're pulling our humerus back towards us. And this is a good thing, and this is a healthy thing. And this is also how we're going to keep from having to compensate movements, because we're going to gain extra degrees of motion through the use of the scapula on top of just the use of the glenohumeral joint. So, talk through the basic movements. The only one that wasn't on there before, when we do protraction, that's going to be mostly pec major, minor, that's pulling us forward. This is kind of that D-bag position that you see dudes kind of walking around trying to look big. And then once again, retraction, it's mostly rhomboids, and mid-trap that's going to pull us back into that position. Think about having good posture. So what's really important about that scapulothoracic joint is it's not like the hips, which I know we haven't covered yet, where we have effectively these massive bones that are holding our lower body together, where we're then going to go ahead and be able to produce all that force that's going to articulate around that ball and socket joint that's a lot deeper at our femur and our inside of our labrum and our hip in general, where what we're going to have is, since it's a lot shallower and we don't have these bones anchored to anything, all of your upper body movements are effectively being stabilized by a bunch of muscles. And if you don't have strong enough musculature of your upper back for the stratus anterior and everything else to stabilize your scapula, you're going to be much more likely to injure yourself whenever you're doing any type of movement with your upper body. And you'll see a lot of people compensate and have issues. So what's really neat is Aaron Sasha and the surgeon that he worked with, his name is Kibler. He's actually the guy that did my shoulder and repaired my pec whenever I tore it a couple years ago. They developed a surgery to reattach the trap and the rhomboid off the scapula, specifically the mid-trap. So what happens is it either occurred in really bad car accidents or in people walking really big dog snorms that they pull too hard. And what happens is when they're trying to walk the dog rips their arm so far forward that it literally, you can see the muscle in my upper back, it tears their trap and the rhomboid right off the scapula, so they can no longer retract. And since they can no longer retract their scapula and they can no longer do essentially a number of the rotations and other movements, they have to compensate even more so with the shoulder joint. And they typically then present with a bunch of rotator cuff issues, maybe a bunch of arthritis growing in the joint because of uneven wear. And it's literally because they tore the muscles off the bone on the posterior, obviously, and they can no longer stabilize the shoulder like they're supposed to. So now, when we say elevators, we're talking about mostly it's trap. So if you guys put your hand right on your shoulder, you can lift yourself up. You can feel that trap working. If you go a little deeper, you can feel that levator scapulae. It also tends to be a nice angry little muscle that doesn't feel too good if you can go ahead and palpate it as you're going and lifting your shoulder up. Now remember, muscles only pull two things together. So when we're using those upper fibers of our trap, we're going to be pulling it not just obviously upwards, but also inwards. And then same thing we're going to find whenever we're using the levator scapulae. Now, when we're talking about depression, we're still using the trap, but notice now it's those lower fibers of the trap, along with, if you go ahead and put your hand underneath your armpit and then push your shoulder down, you're going to feel a little fan-like muscle. I'm getting vain. It's the fan-like muscle right here. That's going to be your, pec minor when we're going up a little bit higher if we're pushing down. And then the levator scapulae is going to be the one that's just in front. Okay. So when we're going with protraction, you can feel that when you push in front. You can feel that stratus anterior, and you can feel that pec minor, which is going to be underneath the pec major. That's going to be contracting. Now, with the retraction, notice we're going to be using the traps again, but now we're talking about those middle fibers, not the upper or the lower. And we're going to be using the rhomboids, which notice are also in an angle that's going to be giving us that downward rotation. So you can see if it contracts, it's going to pull the corner up and in, which in turn is going to start that rotation. Yes, Tinks, I know. It's so, yeah, gray outside. I don't know why you want to go outside, kitty. So when it comes to upward rotation, remember, we're going to have the upper fibers and the lower fibers pulling. So if this is pulling the top of the scapula upwards, this is pulling the bottom of the scapula down, we're going to naturally get this rotation that's going to occur. And then on top of that, when the serratus anterior is also helping, we're going to have that fan-like muscle contracting that's going to be pulling the inferior aspect of the scapula out. And so all three combined is going to give us that rotation, which is moving upwards. Specifically for this example, we're talking from the left arm. Now, downward rotation, we're going to have, notice the muscles of the rhomboid we talked about earlier, pulling in that angle that's going to go upwards. And then when we're pulling from our pec minor up high in our scapula, it's going to naturally pull the front of the scapula down while we're pulling the back of it up. So we're naturally going to have that rotation aspect. So how do we flex the glenohumeral joint? Well, most of it is being done by what's known as the anterior delt. So if you're lifting our arm in front of you, that's going to be this muscle right here. We're then getting a little bit of the clavicular aspect of the pectoralis major that's also lifting the arm. We have the coracobrachialis, which is going to be that thinner muscle right on the inside of the arm that you can see, and then even getting a little bit of assistance from the short head of the biceps brachii. Now, when we are looking at these, because Blaine got kicked out. Welcome back, Blaine. So we're going to have, notice the pec is a big muscle. It's going all the way, has its sternal attachment, has its clavicular attachment. The clavicular is what's going to be helping lift, but it's also pulling us in. The anterior deltoid is what's going to be pulling us to the front. And I like this other picture because we can literally see how we have those fibers in front. This is showing more the medial delt, which is going to allow us to go ahead and get ourselves to have that horizontal abduction. And then we have that coracobrachialis that's a little bit smaller, and then finally that biceps, all of which are just going to be getting us to flex our arm, okay? Dangerous if I can make this work. Now, when it comes to extend, it's being done a little bit by the sternal portion of our pectoralis major. It's being done mostly by our latissimus dorsi. This muscle is massive, and it pulls our arm back and through, okay? It's assisted a little bit by the teres major. The teres major is this little guy right here that's going to be pulling on through. And then also even our long head of our triceps is going to help a little bit. And that's why if we don't stretch out and warm up well enough, Norbs, we're going to have some issues. Oh my gosh, yes. You are so needy. You are so needy. Yes, yes, I love you too, buddy. I love you too. Yes. Sorry, guys. This is why working from home can be difficult. So this is showing pictures of how those muscles are going to sit. Specifically, when we're talking about only the sternal fibers of the pectoralis major, notice the latissimus dorsi is going to be anchored by tendons, or essentially, yeah, the tendons that are going to be sitting really low in the fascia of the low back. And then we have the teres major itself that's going right into the scapula. And then this is going to have to be stabilized by those muscles of the trapezius, yes, and then a little bit by that serratus anterior, because we're trying to move it more downward when we're moving with extension. I know, bud. I know. You want to say hi to the class? You want to say hi to the class? Come on. There you go. Hey, everybody. This is Norbert. Yes, he does exist. He was really hoping he'd get to meet you guys this semester. Yes, I know, buddy. You are really letting me work from home. You're really letting me work from home. Yes, okay. Promise we'll go on a walk later. Social distancing. Okay. So, oh yes, and now his bare claw just went into my toe that's missing a nail. That felt right. Okay, I'm awake. Now, notice, guys, that long head of the triceps. We can see how that's attaching into the scapula. As it's on the back of the arm, it's naturally going to pull itself through, or help pull itself through whenever you're trying to lift yourself in a movement like a pull-up or doing something like a lat pull-down. Now, when we're talking about abductors, so we're going straight away, most of it's being done by the medial delt. So if we're going to go ahead and look at the deltoid, We can see how we have the anterior, the medial, and then the posterior. And each of those are going to go ahead and pull along, obviously, that they can naturally move the bone. Now, our middle delta is the one that's doing the moving. Underneath is the supraspinatus. This is one of the four muscles of the rotator cuff that's going to go and lift it vertically and allow it to go ahead and articulate in such a way that it's not going to allow the humerus to slip out of the glenoid fossa. So it's keeping it more stabilized. It's not the main movement. Okay. Now, notice, guys, when we're looking at this abduction, the supraspinatus just starts in the very beginning. After that, now we're talking about the rest of the work is going to go ahead and be the middle deltoid that's doing the major work. And all of the other muscles of the rotator cuff, the infraspinatus, the supraspinatus, and the teres minor, are all going to work to help stabilize the humerus and keep it where it needs to be inside of the socket. Now, more of the global power when we're looking at throwing or rotation, that's coming from things like our lats, our pecs, our teres major, our, a little bit of the posterior deltoid, but we're going to find that it's not mechanically advantageous to use that one. So if we're going and having abduction, adduction is being done mostly by the lat, assisted by the teres major, a little bit of the sternal fibers of the pec major, and then also by both the short head and the long head of the biceps brachii. Okay. Most of the work, though, guys, once again, is being done by the lat. Now, notice how with the angle of pull with the pec, it's not going to be our higher sternal fibers, it's going to be our lower sternal fibers that's really helping pull the arm down. Initially, you're going to get more help from those higher fibers, but then as we go with that angle of pennation, if I'm really using my pec at this point, it's actually going to be pulling my arm more forward than it's going to be helping me pull down, where the inferior fibers are still going to be help assisting with pulling that arm down my side. Where the entire time with the lat, because it's sweeping in so much lower, it's going to be helping bring that arm through. Teres minor's tiny, so why do we even care? No, I'm kidding, it's useful. So those are our four muscles of a rotator cuff. They're each going to be important for, once again, anchoring and keeping the humerus where it needs to be inside the joint. And so when we're talking about medial rotation, so we're pulling our arm and going inside, okay, this is going to be being done by our subscapularis, which is underneath your scapula, palpating, it hurts like an MF, so don't worry about it. Our teres major is going to be one that's giving us more, and that's where we find our pec majors being useful, anterior delt, and even our lat, along with the short head or biceps, are all helping us throw a ball when we're talking about going internal. Now we're going lateral, so now we're talking about external rotation. We're getting that to be done by the infraspinatus, which is going to be the muscle on the bottom part of the outside of your scapula. If you ever roll around on like a lacrosse ball or something, just like on the exterior of your scapula, it'll tell you what's up. Our teres minor, which is going to be above our teres major, and is also being assisted by that posterior deltoid, which naturally tends to be much smaller in most individuals. But that's why it's really important that think about when we do a movement like a push-up. We're going to be building our pec major, anterior deltoid, triceps, etc. If you're doing pull-ups, you're doing the same, you're going to be building pecs a little bit, remember it's more of those inferior fibers, but you're definitely getting into your lats, you're getting into your teres major. Unless you're actively doing external rotation work, you're probably neglecting your lateral rotation. And like anything else, bones are slaves to your muscles. And if your muscles in the exterior rotation are so much stronger than the muscles for your interior rotation, turns out, or sorry, if your muscles for interior rotation are so much stronger than the muscles for exterior rotation, well, after you throw a ball, the muscles that are deaccelerating your arm are those lateral rotators. And if they're too weak, turns out we can injure them and hurt our throwing arm because we're not allowing our body to have an appropriate braking system. It's got a great gas pedal, but it's got no brakes, which if any of you guys have ever driven in a car where the brakes went out, you learn pretty quickly that I'd almost rather have brakes that work than an engine that doesn't. Then, oh, hey, Tinks, please don't step on my computer. And now the cat, one of the two has come up. Not the best one. Best one's Bahamut. Bahamut was sleeping on the dog bed because that's how he rolls. So now you can see a picture of what's going on with our subscapularis and our teres major when it comes to medial rotation. Sorry, make sure you get my elbow on the screen. And then how that's going to be assisted by the pec, the anterior delt, the lat, and then even the short head of the biceps brachii. Now, when we go and we look at that lateral, remember that's going to be infraspinatus, teres minor, and the posterior delt. So you can see that infraspinatus, that's literally right underneath our scapular spine on the posterior aspect. That's going to see how it just naturally is. If one arm is in neutral, that's what's giving us that external rotation. We've got the teres minor that's also pulling from the outside of the humerus, helping it rotate from behind. And then that posterior deltoid a little bit also. Now, teres major and latissimus dorsi are going to help a little bit, but one thing that's really important to keep in mind, guys, is angle of pennation, which is the angle that the muscle is going to pull according to its position in the range of motion. So when we're talking about getting an assist of horizontal abduction, okay, so we're trying to go ahead and get it out from the body. Well, it turns out the lat's going to be able to help a little bit depending on the position. So if we're fully internally rotated and away from our body, that's where you're going to feel maybe a little bit of stretch on the lat, and then some of the aspects of the teres minor and teres major, that's going to allow us to pull on back. But if we happen to be already in this extended back position, you're not going to really get much more out of it, especially if we're in a very shortened position, because our lat is effectively as short as possible and in a position where it can't really pull much further. So horizontal abductors, so moving away from the body. We've got that medial delt, we've got that infraspinatus, and we've got the teres minor. And then, sorry, my apologies. We're going horizontal, we're now in front of our body. So horizontal abduction is pulling our arms away, and that's where you can see where we're going to have the posterior delt and the other aspect. We then have horizontal adduction, aka let's get really good at hugging. And that's coming mostly from pec major, a little bit of the anterior delt, a little bit of the coracobrachialis, and it's even going to be assisted somewhat by the short head of the biceps brachii. Now, any of you guys that have ever done heavy pec flies, specifically with having with your arms in a straight position the entire time, you've maybe felt some actual bicep soreness the next day. And that's an indicator of specifically how you're recruiting that short head of the biceps when you're going and doing this. This is Tinks. Her real name is Spyro, but she is a dum-dum, but she's such a friendly kitty, isn't she? Yes, you are, and you love your massages. Welcome to my life, folks. It's pretty exciting. So now, with that horizontal adduction, now guys, take a look when we're talking about that musculature. Look at how much larger your pecs are compared to that anterior delt, and look at the more red picture with the skeleton, because we can see how the anterior portion of those fibers that are further down the scapula would obviously be able to work a little bit more with adduction. And then the coracobrachialis, which is further into the arm, it's going to assist a little bit, but your major force is coming from your pec major. One thing that was fun, whenever I tore my pec, I specifically tore the pec major, the clavicular action off of the bone. I still had my sternal component. That was still attached. And what was interesting is during that period of time, my ability to do horizontal adduction, specifically from movements like a bench press, literally, I could take a 120-pound dumbbell in my non-torn arm, my left hand, and do that for a set of 10. At my best, I could only do 80 pounds for, I don't think I could get a full set of 10 with my right hand, and I could only do it with my elbow tight into my body because I didn't have that horizontal adduction strength because the muscle was literally not attached. And even though I still obviously had an intact anterior delt and coracobrachialis, they're literally not mechanically advantageous enough and or strong enough to be able to compensate that much to replace that muscle action. So when we're really talking about some of these movement patterns, guys, you need to also keep in mind which muscles are doing the major action. Yeah, we're going to list a number that are going to be important, but I could snip off somebody's coracobrachialis, and they're going to suck, but you'd be fine. You'd have a little more instability. But once again, when that pec's torn, my gosh, you just hemorrhage strength. Yes, kitty. Yes, kitty. You're such a nice, pretty kitty, aren't you? Don't you dare bite me. At some point, the padding becomes a trap. Oh, and we're about at that point, and that's okay. That's okay. So Some common issues and injuries of the shoulder. Yep, you're pointing side up. I'm stepping back. Is dislocations. Obviously, this can happen from sport. I'm sure some of you guys have either had this happen to you or you've seen this happen. We can have rotator cuff injuries, and this can be obviously tears, sprains of those muscles involved. Rotational injuries in general. This can be because we've obviously pushed it too far. We have strains, sprains of some of the muscles involved. And then we can even have subscapular neuropathy. Oh, we're missing an R in there. That's kind of cool. Look at that. We're fixing problems, guys. And we're going to have issues with muscle activation. And if we have issues with muscle activation, well, it turns out we're not going to be able to move the body appropriately, and we're going to be more likely to injure ourselves. Because like anything else, if we start to compensate, kidding. We're such a good kitty. Yep, say hi, Tinks. The kids can't pet you. No biting. No biting. Good kitty. Good kitty. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so let's talk about impingement. I'm sure some of you guys have had this happen before, where individuals who keep doing the same movement over and over again overhead can have issues with impinging the shoulder, because we literally keep driving the humerus up into the shoulder joint. No, don't touch the touchpad. Don't touch the touchpad. Oh, gosh. Yeah, you guys are living the dream today. And this is going to effectively incur more. Okay, you're going to have to go on the floor. You're going to have to go on the floor. You ready to go on the floor? On the floor and fly. She's a good kitty. Don't worry, she's fine. That happens all the time around here. But impingements are going to be an irritation. Can be things of like the short head of the long head of the biceps brachii. Can be some of the other tendons that effectively keep getting rubbed back and forth as we're moving through the joint because of the instability. We're using muscles to keep not just the scapula in place, but also to keep the humerus quite frequently in place, along with the ligaments on top of it. So we have to be mindful that we're not ever overstressing the tissues. Every movement we have is not 100% perfect. And remember, guys, we've talked about pressure. We've talked about friction. So if you keep applying friction, pressure, we've got that compression force, we've got that tension force, we have that shear force. Well, like anything else, if I was to have you guys take a little bit of sandpaper and just rub it across your hand for a second, you'd be fine. But if I had you take sandpaper, and I'm referring to like a lower grit, so it's a lot harsher, if I made you do that for 10 minutes, you might literally be bleeding. And if you did that for 10 hours, you might be all the way down to the bone. So like anything, we keep overstressing the tissues in a way that individuals are unable to recover from appropriately, and those tissue integrity keeps going down and down and down. Because one of the major flaws of the way that all of our tendons and ligaments are set up, and arguably it's a little bit useful in a way, is they don't have their own vasculature, which means they don't have capillaries feeding blood to them. Since they don't have capillaries feeding blood to them, the only way that they're going to be able to recover, just like we talked about with the disc to the back, is through movement. But the problem is we have to get them to do enough movement that we're going to effectively get a little bit more diffusion of oxygen and other nutrients to the area, but we're not going to be doing too much extra damage to those tissues at the same time. That's going to diminish our body's ability to recover.
Like physical therapy.
Bingo. So we then have our humeral ulnar joint, aka we have the elbow. Okay, this is going to be where we effectively have the trochlear fossa interacting with your ulna, and once again, elbow. Now, turns out we can do flexion, which is biceps brachii, the brachialis, which is underneath, and then this little guy right there, that's what's known as your brachioradialis. Those are all together are going to allow us to go ahead and have flexion at the elbow. So they're going to be as organized as such. In reality, you can tear your biceps and you're still going to be able to flex your elbow. You're just not going to have as much strength. And one of the issues with when we look at the biceps is notice they're a two joint muscle. They're attaching all the way up into your shoulder and then all the way down into your ulna, whereas our brachialis is actually attaching into our humerus and then into our ulna. And if you also notice where our biceps brachii is going into the ulna, whereas the brachialis is going in the radius, That's why when people talk about doing a hammer grip or a neutral grip or an overhand, they're going to be naturally working on that brachioradialis more or that brachialis more. When they're going with the palm up, that's going to have us more in a supinated position, which in turn, you scratch me. It's going to go ahead and give us a greater amount of biceps brachii activation. So that brachialis, as it's linking on through, it's going to be the one that's doing, once again, most of the real work. And at the same time, it's the one that's least likely to tear, but that's because it doesn't have as great of a range of motion as it potentially has to go through. Whereas the biceps brachii, if you want to feel a good stretch on your bicep, anchor your arm on something behind you and then keep that elbow straight, and you'll feel that stretch a lot better on the biceps. Whereas you can hold a dumbbell with your elbow locked and you're never going to feel anything as far as a stretch, especially if we have our arm in a position in front of us, because we are not putting that bicep through a further range of motion than we can potentially tolerate. So then we have extension at the elbow joint, and that's going to be performed by the triceps. So we've got our long head, our medial head, and our lateral head of the triceps. And all three of those are going to be giving us that extension at the joint. We've got the anconeus, which is a really, really small guy that's assisting and more or less making sure that we keep our elbow joint between our ulna and our humerus correctly articulating. Now, notice when we're looking at that tricep, the long head is going to go all the way into the scapula, hence why it's going to help us a little bit with when we're trying to go into flexion. Ooh, we now have an iPhone in the meeting. That's fascinating. When you guys get a chance, just put on the chat who's here so I can kind of see if the chat's A, working, and B, who else in the meeting. But what's really neat when we're looking at the triceps, and this is now trying to get ourselves into being a little bit more bros, every muscle itself tends to get a better effect from training if we're using a full range of motion and having that muscle get a stretch on it. So in order to get a full stretch on the long head and the medial head, since they both articulate directly into the humerus, we just have to get our arm all the way into our body and then all the way back out. However, in order to get a stretch on the long head, that's why you need to go actually into overhead exercises on the triceps. And that's going to go ahead and put a stretch on the long head, because now we're getting it into that lengthened position, so it's going to have to work through a full range of motion. So if you're trying to be a bodybuilder, you're trying to be a bro and trying to have bigger triceps, which honestly is 2/3 of your arm. When you're looking at arm size, it's actually mostly coming from your triceps. You want to make sure that you're doing overhead triceps work, skull crushers, overhead sculls. Some people used to refer to that as a French press, or just cable work overhead. I'm a big fan of body weight overhead triceps, but we can bro out later. For now, let's keep with the science. So, getting back to it, we then have our humeral radial joint, which is just a gliding joint. And that's where our humerus and our humerus and our ulnas can interact. It's kind of cool as you can actually see that whenever I supinate, notice, sorry, turn my wrist upwards, you can actually see the bicep move, because the bicep actually is one of the major supinators. You got your pronator teres and your pronator quadratus, which is going to allow us to turn our forearm over. And turns out that can be useful in certain sports like baseball. You actually want to have a little bit more developed musculature of the forearm for control. So the proximal, okay, and the distal radial ulnar joints are pivot joints, meaning they rotate. So when I have my arm like this, my ulna is obviously going through my pinky, my radius is going through the side. But what's really cool is whenever I turn this over, I've now actually literally turned my radius and my ulna, so they're now rotated on top of each other. Okay? And that's neat because it turns out it's naturally gliding. They have it go from one side to the other. Now, just what I brought up a little bit before, we've got that pronator quadratus and that pronator teres that's going to go ahead and allow us to turn our forearms over. Okay. We then have on the supinator side, well, we have the supinator muscle, but then the other muscle that's going to help with that supinator is going to actually be, remember, that biceps brachii. Now, we then have the radial carpal joints. Okay. This is going to be the articulation between our radius and our wrist. Now, I'm not going to have you guys memorize each of the different muscles, or sorry, bones of the wrist, Instead, we're going to talk about this more globally. Now, one of the first things to understand when we talk about globally, which can be the retinacula, okay? That is going to be the fascia that's going to go ahead and protect all the tendons in your hands that are allowing your hands to move. One thing that's important to understand when we're looking at the hand is you really don't actually have, aside from right here in your thumb, you don't actually have any, well, you got a little bit there, sorry, also when you're moving your pinky. But you don't have any muscle through here. It's just essentially skin, fat, and bone that's giving us our actual hand. All of this is being done by the muscles of our forearms. So if you have your hand open and you push in, you can have, and you'll see these muscles naturally close your hand because you're actually pulling on these tendons. Okay, so we need to protect these tendons going through the wrist, and that's where some folks are going to maybe develop carpal tunnel. Now, we got a lot here. Okay, we got our flexor carpi radialis and our flexor carpi ulnaris that are going to be able to cause us to flex our wrists, along with our palmaris longus, and then our flexor digitorum superficialis, and then profundus that are allowing us to obviously flex our fingers. So when you really think make a fist and you rotate through, you can feel how your forearm's naturally going to ball up as we're moving on forward. Now, when it comes to extensor, well, we have the extensor carpi longus, brevis, and ulnaris that are all going to go ahead and allow us to extend at the wrist joint. Now, we also have some other wrist extensor movement muscles that are only going to work on the wrist. But if you notice the forearm, it turns out the extensor muscles are nowhere near as big as our flexor muscles. But that's just the natural imbalance of how we use our hands. And we find the same type of imbalance in muscle groups like our tibialis anterior to our gastroc and our soleus, or from our glutes to our hip flexors. So we then have our carpometacarpal joints, okay? This is going to be that thumb and that saddle joint that's going to go ahead, and then the gliding joints that we're going to have when we're looking through our carpals, okay? We then are going to go ahead and have our intermetacarpal joints, which is going to be the shared joint capsule of how our fingers are going to be able to move back and forth so I can squeeze my hand and have my fingers rotate a little bit through. And then we have our metacarpal pharyngeals. So this is going to be those rounded, which allows us to go in flexion extension. And then we can have abduction, adduction, and then we can also have circumduction. Okay, woohoo, who cares? But these are going to be our knuckles. And it turns out it's really interesting because if you look at a lot of other animals, specifically the other apes, one of the things that humans can do that a lot of other species can't is we can make a fist. And so arguably that's something that doesn't say positive things about human beings and their interactions with other humans, but that's something that a lot of chimpanzees, monkeys, and otherwise can't do. They actually can't make a full fist, like they're actually going to try to punch something. Also notice how when we look at the fist, naturally your first two knuckles stick up higher. They also happen to be the ones that are the denser bones that are less likely to break. So hence the old adage is these are the muscles that hurt them, or sorry, these are the bones that hurt them, these are the bones that hurt you. Hence why you have people like, dude, I broke my hand punching somebody in the face. They're usually referring to what's known as a boxer's fracture. That's when you punch somebody like an idiot and you hit them with your pinky. And that's because you threw something wild and outside and you weren't hitting them appropriately. And because of that, bone breaks, you have to have a reset and you have to have a fix. If you ever meet somebody that brags about that, don't be too concerned. They don't know how to punch somebody correctly. If they ever said they broke their first two knuckles, have questions, because that is somebody that really unloaded on something and that something didn't give up its ground too much. So what are the joints that we can have? Well, once again, we can have flexion, we can have extension, adduction, abduction, and circumduction, aka we can draw I'm not trying to flick you guys off. Draw circles with our fingers. Now, we have extrinsic muscles that are going to attach both proximal and distal to the wrist that are going to allow us to go ahead and move. And then we have the intrinsic muscles that are going to be both, they're going to be distal to the wrist. Okay. Oh, sweet. Nice. Went through all the slides. And that, yeah, only took 43 minutes. So that was actually pretty darn quick. What questions do you guys have? Because we kind of blew through that real fast because I didn't hear anything from anybody. Oh, that would be why, because I can't hear anybody other than uh, well, that's
So
not good.
is all of chapter 7 just basically the anatomy and physiology?
So chapter 7, yeah, we're mostly just talking about well, it's not just the anatomy and well, neurophysiology is not really what we're doing. It's more the kinesiology. So not just here are the muscles, but what they're going to be doing. What can you guys see right now? Because my screen's currently pooping out on me. Okay, here we go. I think this is now, okay, well, God, that's terrifying. I look like hell. Okay. Um, okay, well, everybody's unmuted that can be, but I guess Blaine and Jalen are not trying to hop in here. Go ahead. And no offense, Anderson, I'm going to stop you and I'm going to go back to screen sharing and see how that goes. All right. Wow, this is getting weird. Okay. So what other questions can I help you guys?
Can
Nothing?
you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Is the chapter 7 quiz going to be about the material in the PowerPoint?
Yes, yes. Guys, the big thing to really focus on is the scapula. The scapula and the muscles that are going to allow you to move it, and then understanding the force linkages between them. So, like I gave you guys, anytime we're going to have that horizontal adduction, we're going to have that scapular protraction. So not only are we using our pec, our anterior delt, to go ahead and pull ourselves across, and a little bit of the biceps and the coracobrachialis, but then our pec minor and our serratus anterior are going to be pulling that scapula forward. So anytime we're pushing something away, we're linking the force between not just the shoulder itself, the humerus moving, the scapula, but also the scapula itself moving. So keep that in mind because we're going to be force linking from the one to the other. Okay. What other questions you guys got?
Can you hear me?
I can barely hear you. Repeat yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, what's up?
Okay. Do you still want us to be doing the student wellness survey?
Yeah, feel free. Because Lord
Okay.
knows now the wellness is definitely pretty interesting. God, we might be figuring out who's got the plague, which I hope is none of you, just so we're clear. Yeah, guys, so for the rest of the semester, so my goal is to try to do these lectures effectively. We'll cover the information and I'll try to do this Zoom situation. Obviously, I don't know if everybody's got a good enough connection that they can actually talk so I can hear you. But I plan on trying to have lectures per the usual. I'm going to shoot some videos of me doing the labs and I'll post that online. So you'll be able to watch the video and see the numbers that we got doing those labs. And then those will be the numbers that you'll report for your lab assignment. And then, feel free to ask questions. For your guys' projects, obviously now really make sure that you guys are talking with the other people in your group. So that way you guys can try to do what you can. I know if you guys weren't able to video the movements, man, just do your best. We're, as you can tell, everybody's kind of scrambling right now. And my goal for you guys is kind of the goal it's always been is I want you guys to have gotten something out of this and learn something. We're not trying to punish ourselves with work, and we're trying to make things work. It seems like this is kind of working, but I'm not quite sure, how great this is going to come across for everybody. As far as, are you able to really, hear everything that I'm saying and understand everything that I'm doing? Yeah, that's not what I wanted. So, you know, uh, yeah, we're all just trying to make things work. So your quizzes, homework quizzes are going to be due as per the usual. The one for this week is going to be open until next week, so you don't have to worry about it. The this week, both the individual and the group one, they're not going to be due until effectively what'll be next Thursday. But the rest of the quizzes for the rest of the semester, they're not going to have passwords on them. You're going to be able to open them up and take a look at them and take them. But you should have all the information you need. I've already recorded these slides from a previous semester, so you guys can go ahead and just look online and find those. I'm going to hopefully be able to just, after we do the Zoom meeting, it says that I'm saving it. So I'm going to then go ahead and put it up on like YouTube. And I've got a YouTube stream or whatever. Yes, Tinks, I know there's a bird out there. Where I'm going to go ahead and share it that way with you guys. So you've got that information and you guys can go from there. Shoot me an email. If we need to talk on the phone, if we need to do kind of like this Zoom meetings or something else. Yeah, Kitty, what's going on, girl? I know. I'm here, but I'm not paying attention. So, and she just jumped back up on the table. So, but does that kind of answer your questions and maybe help get rid of some concerns? Now for the exam, do not sit on the keyboard, girl. Do not sit on the keyboard. You're walking back on the keyboard. I'm gonna walk over here so you come towards me. Come towards me, Kitty. Good kitty. Is the camera working for you guys? Hello?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, so you can see me right now?
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay. So I apologize for you guys just having to see my cat's butt.
So you said the labs that you're gonna video are the numbers that you get in those videos are the same numbers we're to report on the lab assignments?
Bingo. So I'm not going to fully explain what each of the numbers are. And part of it, you guys still are going to have to do the math on it.
Right.
So one of them is going to be finding the center of gravity, which literally just involves laying down on the exam table on top of, yes, how are you doing, Tim? Yes, so good to see you too, girl. So that way, you guys are still going to have to look at the information on your own. It's the best I can currently think of. Seeing as how I don't think a lot of you guys have got force plates hanging out at your house or apartment that you can go ahead and use to figure out all these numbers. So, ain't that right, Tinker Stinker? Yes, you never get enough attention. So, otherwise, you guys good? Anything else I can help you guys with right now? Well, seeing as how there's a resounding lack of anything right there, I'll go with maybe. Stay safe out there, guys. If you guys need calories, we still have a lot of protein powder in the lab. I'm going to be going to campus a little bit. And I have no issue with, just leaving a bunch of protein containers right outside of the Moberly building, and you just come and grab whatever you need. Just shoot me an email, or otherwise, if you just want me to leave some stuff out there for you. Otherwise, be safe, guys. And if you have questions, concerns, just contact me. And I'll try to get back to you guys as soon as I can, because I'm obviously getting a lot of concerned emails from a number of individuals, since obviously things are very different than they were simply 2 weeks ago. Sound good, guys? Okay. I'm gonna go with maybe, because can anybody see the chat?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody's trying to write on it, and that's all right. All right. So, guys, have yourselves a good day. Yes, thanks. I know. My breath smells like green tea. Welcome to my life, guys. All right. Have a great day, guys. Stay safe, and I will talk with you guys more later on this week. Next week. I'll be back here Tuesday morning, and it should be the same link, I think, each time. If it changes, I will put that up in another announcement in Blackboard, so you guys have that ready to go.
Sweet.
All right.
All right, guys. Miss you guys. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
See ya.